Welcome, Shami Chakrabarti. Now, we could have a very, very boring interview in which I said it's all Jeremy Corbyn's fault, he's got to go, and you said, no, it's not. And we just go round and round and round in circles, and everybody else wanders off and has cups of coffee.
So we won't do that.
So let's try not to do that. Let's try and be serious about it. How deep a hole do you think you're in when you look at that Copeland result? What did you think?
Well, I was in Copeland last weekend knocking on doors, and I felt that Copeland is probably one of those constituencies that was neglected by my own party over some years. It's remote from London. It's changed its shape over many years. There's the nuclear industry and people who've done very well out of that industry, and then there are the people left behind. And I think it just goes to show that you cannot weigh people's votes. You have to cherish them. And yes, we lost by 2,000, but I believe that when people see what Mrs May's hard Brexit looks like, and when people see an alternative vision coming from a more united Labour Party, as I believe we can be, they will change their minds.
You see, that sounds a little bit like what Jeremy Corbyn said when he said it was basically a revolt against the establishment, which doesn't really make sense because
but it does, though, because in Copeland...
Just wait a second. How can people, if they're rebelling against the establishment, turn and vote for Theresa May, the Prime Minister, and the Conservative Party?
From my experience in Copeland, Labour has looked like the establishment for a very long time because they've been represented by Labour for a long time. So there are peculiarities about that seat, like what was said about our position on the nuclear industry that was apocryphal and so on. But I don't want to just make it all about the specifics of Copeland. We've clearly got work to do. We've clearly suffered from disunity to leadership elections in the space of a year. We've clearly suffered from the fact that our supporters were divided, like the country, over Brexit, and that's been such a big issue for some time. But now I think, once Article 50 is triggered, as it will be, we have an opportunity to unite about things that really matter to people's lives, like schools and hospitals and jobs and benefits, like this terrible cut to the disability benefits.
There is something strange happening here, which is that on the NHS, on disability benefits and so forth, you have messages which you think people really care about and are central to their lives. And yet when Labour talks about it, it does not cut through. There is something going wrong between the Labour Party on the one hand and the country on the other.
Well, I think on cutting through, we have suffered, as I say, from disunity. If we're always talking about the leadership and fighting with each other over leadership, that won't help us cut through. I think sometimes we haven't had the fairest, almost balanced treatment in the media, including in the broadcast media.
As you know, the left has always said it's the media.
No, it's not the media. No, but I'm not blaming the media. I'm just saying that the disunity has been the focus. I mean, even on your programme last week, a few days before a by-election in 2 Brexit seats, there wasn't a single person on your programme speaking for the leadership. And
there was a well represented Labour MP in the paper review who was...
And you had Lord Mandelson talking about... Lord Mandelson, you're allowed to have whoever you like, but it wasn't, if I may say so, the fairest balance a few days before a by-election in 2 Labour Brexit seats.
Well, except that Lord Mandelson and Tony Blair, who's also criticised for this, under that terrible regime, Labour won Copeland by massive majorities, time and time again, and the same with Stoke.
It's not about the terrible regime. It's about the fact that representatives cannot weigh people's votes anymore. And my experience from talking to people in Copeland is that they felt that they were neglected for too long.
They were taken for granted by the Labour Party and they were going to kick back.
For too long, and that is not going to happen. And Jack Dromey is right when he says that part of what worked for Labour in Stoke was listening to people and listening to their concerns that are not about Jeremy Corbyn, but about the fact, for example, in Stoke that people want social housing, about the fact, for example, that in Copeland people don't have adequate roads and now their hospital is under threat.
OK, so we agree that something has to change. Let me read you Dave Prentice, a very important figure in the Labour movement, of course, the Unison General Secretary, who said Stoke should never have been in doubt. To lose Copeland, held by Labour for 83 years, to a party that has inflicted 7 years of painful spending cuts on our country and is damaging the NHS, is disastrous. Last autumn, I said Labour had never been further from government in my lifetime. 5 months on, the party still hasn't moved an inch closer to Downing Street. Copeland is indicative of a party sliding towards irrelevance. And that, if I may say so, is on your watch and Jeremy Corbyn's watch.
Well, what I would say to Dave Prentice and some of these other great men of the left is that it's time to unite, because because constant attacks on the leadership, constant leadership elections, constant divisions don't actually attack the issues that would allow us to present an alternative vision of what this country should be.
Shami Chakrabarti, he wasn't attacking the leadership there. He was describing what is happening. He was describing reality. There are some people who say that you are all, frankly, distanced from reality, that you are hiding from what's really going on.
Well, I don't accept that. I've just talked to you for some minutes about what I think has been happening in places like Copeland. I think people have felt neglected and left behind by their representatives, including Labour representatives, for too long. And I think whether it's Jack Dromey or whether it's Jeremy Corbyn, I think that the party is in listening mode, but it won't be able to put that listening into practice unless it unites.
Because you see, we've seen a whole series of excuses about Copeland.
It's not an excuse.
Well, you yourself said, I think we'd have suffered from Storm Doris, because traditionally it's Labour voters who don't have cars and find it harder in bad weather.
Well, that is one aspect of all by-elections.
We've had wind in by-elections for hundreds of years,
Yes.
and somehow voters for the opposition parties have managed to come out and defeat the government party for hundreds of years.
There was a low turnout in Copeland, and having been to Copeland recently, I know that it's a very rural constituency. Public transport is not great, but it's just one factor. Of course, that's not. Of course, that's not.